Hello, and welcome to Learning Curve, Navigating Education Access in a Pandemic. I'm KRISTIN Roberts, Vice President of News for McClatchy. This school year is beginning with more questions than answers. Working families are struggling to help their kids learn online. Parents are weighing the risks of sending their children into the classroom and the emotional effects of keeping them home. And districts are trying to bridge the digital divide that could leave some of our students behind. How should our schools and our educators and parents tackle these issues? Today, we've gathered leaders, educators, mental health experts, and parents to help find answers to these questions. And we hope these conversations bring you insight and value. In addition to this discussion today, we'll hold a national conversation on September the 3rd that is focused on the challenges of educating during a pandemic. I hope you'll join us then as well. So let's begin. I'd like to introduce the Fresno Education Lab's engagement reporter, SOPHIA DIEPPA, who will lead today's conversation.
Thank you, KRISTIN. Hello, my name is SOPHIA DIEPPA, pronouns she, her, hers. I am the engagement reporter at the Fresno Bee Education Lab. The Ed Lab, as we call it, includes 3 reporters and 1 editor. We work on reporting education stories in the Valley with a focus on educational attainment and solutions journalism. Welcome all. COVID-19 and coronavirus has caused a myriad of academic issues that we hope to cover in our panel today. Although there has been a lot of uncertainty on when this pandemic will end, one thing that is for sure is that this entire situation has exacerbated ongoing inequities our students may already be facing. Inequities such as racial injustice and poverty have made learning under these circumstances nebulous, if not downright impossible for some. The issues we're talking about today are problems that exist locally in the San Joaquin Valley and statewide throughout the state of California. So I want to dive right into one of the most pressing issues in the country, and that is the mental health of our students. Among our panelists, I have Marisa Moraza, who's the Youth Advocacy and Leadership Manager at Fresno Barrios Unidos. Cecilia Castro, hi. Cecilia Castro, who's the Education Policy Director for the Dolores Huerta Foundation. Welcome, Cecilia. Patrick Hamilton, who is the Program Manager for the Sweet Potato Project. Hi, Patrick.
How you doing? How you doing?
And last but not least, Jerry Rivera. Jerry is a current pre-med student at the University of California, Davis, an essential worker and a community activist who has worked on education funding and voter registration efforts. So I want to kick it off with you, Jerry, because you're living this experience. So, and we had some discussions already about Wi-Fi issues that we have had in real life, even in prepping for this panel. So, how has studying under these conditions impacted your mental health, and what have you seen from your fellow classmates? I think that the digital divide has become very real right now. So we're actually going to move, we're going to roll along, and we're actually going to move on to Marisa Moraza. Oh, is Jerry back? Hey, Jerry. Were you able to hear the question?
Yeah.
Okay.
How ironic how this happened during the show.
Dude, it's so real. Yes.
Yeah. So the question is, how are students feeling during this time? And of course, I feel like students are definitely feeling anxious with the transition to online classes. I know myself and other people are finding it hard to concentrate with everything going on in terms of protests, wildfires, immigrant rights, the upcoming election, and many other issues, all while being on high alert for COVID-19. In my community, most students who are now adjusting to learning from home have resorted to becoming essential workers just so that they can provide for their families due to the pandemic. Everything is so new, and students are
It seems that we have some connectivity issues, which is really sad because he was on something that was a really important issue of how students are having to sacrifice their education in order to be able to work and go into essential work. So I was going to actually shift it because I know, Marisa Moraza, you have done also a lot of work in the community and a lot of work with students. So maybe you can talk a little bit about the work with students.
Yeah, of course. So I definitely agree with what Jerry was starting to say. So again, I work with Fresno Barrios Unidos, And primarily we work with students who are in South Fresno. And so when we're looking at school districts, we have students who are in Fresno Unified, Central Unified, and students who are in charter schools or alternative ed who have been pushed out of Fresno Unified as well. So what we are seeing is yes, this exacerbation of inequities that we had previously seen. And really we have to acknowledge that we are facing continued systemic racism and violence. And in a crisis such as this pandemic, these inequities are just really unveiled. And so these stressors impact the mental health and wellness of our youth and their families. So specifically what we are seeing and hearing from our youth and young parents in our programs are just heightened concern about meeting basic needs such as housing, food security, access to healthy food even, access to resources for their family like childcare, diapers, and then also just how they're going to provide for their families and maintain wellness. We are also hearing that youth are bored, especially our young ones. They want to engage, they want to connect. And then we're also seeing and hearing a lot of loss or grief. And this could be from COVID and then also other impacts such as community violence. So there is this added stress, this added anxiety and trauma that's going on in our communities. And when it comes to this new system of learning and education, I really want to uplift the term emergency education. Our schools are not equipped right now to address the structural racism and poverty that has dominated our communities and really led to this dire situation. And so we want to make sure that this online learning experience does not become the new form of school pushout for our Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and especially our LGBTQ students as well. So there really is a need for connection and engagement. Our students are already feeling overwhelmed in this new system of emergency education. There's an inability to connect with teachers. This could be because of internet issues or also because classrooms still remain too big. Students are stressed out about workload already, and we're only in a week and a half of this new system in the semester. And then families are stressed about having reliable information in the language, in their home language. So whether this is access to technology or even understanding what this new system is. Their families are essential workers. Oftentimes our youth themselves are working and providing for their families too. So it's really about meeting those basic needs so that we can start getting to beyond this point of survival and really push thriving in our communities.
Thank you so much, Marisa. I really appreciate that. I think, yeah, so we were able to get Jerry on. I'm so sorry that you're having this issue, Jerry, and I feel like this just highlights even more the problems that we're experiencing. I know you were talking about the need for students having to become essential workers, and I know that yesterday when we were talking, you had mentioned that there were some students who are parked outside of Taco Bell and McDonald's just to get Wi-Fi so that they can do their schoolwork. Can you explain a little bit about that, Jerry?
Yeah, exactly. This just showcases one of the many struggles that students face during this pandemic. And like I was saying, everything is so new and students are trying to do the most to improve their education. However, many students struggle due to the draining effect of the digital divide. Almost everyone is going through something at the moment, whether it be mentally, financially, or emotionally.
Yeah. Thank you, Jerry. So I want to shift it over to Patrick now. I know that you have done a lot of work in West Fresno with students around the topic of mental health. Can you please share a little bit about what you've seen since the coronavirus hit and what are some of the mental health needs in that area?
Well, for starters, it's been a tough road for our youth around here. With so much idle time on their hands, with an idle mind is a devil's playground. So they have been engaging in numerous community violence and just different types of stuff that they need not to, as kids, be witnessing. And as for the parents, it's been a hard pill to swallow. Some parents having to quit their jobs just to stay at home. Some parents having to, pay someone to stay at home with their kids. With the kids forced to stay at home, it's been rough. So not being able to supervise your home and go to work, and provide for your family. Some families it's just torn apart. Others, they're just bored. Like they just want something to do. They're looking for something. They're looking for something to attach on to, someone to talk to, some answers. They're lost out here. So, and in this community over here, it's not so friendly as everyone may think. It's easy for kids to get involved in gangs, drug violence, or even sex trafficking. So with all this out of time on their hands, it's easy for them to get in trouble. So a lot of kids are dropping out of school. They're not even trying to even go back to school to further their education.
Wow. Thank you, Patrick. That's very heavy. Cecilia, I wanted to shift the floor to you because I know that you've also, the Dolores Huerta Foundation has done a lot of work in rural areas in Bakersfield and Kern. And I wanted to learn a little bit more about what's the situation over there and what are some of the mental health needs of parents and students in that area.
Yeah, so I think Marisa, touched on that beautifully by really speaking about the impacts of racism on, our school districts. And I wanted to just highlight on the fact that the mental health or access to mental health has been a priority for our community, our students and parents before COVID. Has been a priority during COVID, and it will continue to be a priority after COVID. I mean, it was really no surprise that when school closures happened, when asked about the mental health support services that were available, districts really didn't have a clear answer about the support services that they could offer. Many of our school districts put out a 1-800 number that, a national hotline that parents or students could call. And many of our parents were being told by districts that they would only be reaching out to those students that had already been referred to support services prior to COVID. And why is that, right? Because there's just a lack of inadequate mental health supports. One of our largest high school districts here in Kern County, we have huge disparities when it comes to mental health and behavioral health support services. About 1,500 students for one social worker. We have 6 nurses for 40,000 students in the school district. I mean, districts can just really not handle a needs assessment, which is really crucially needed for students, and they don't have the support staff in order to be able to do so. So I think even just the first step of just having the access to these types of support services, I mean, our young people, when asked, what is it that they would like to see? It's just somebody to talk to, right? There's no, it's not a hard ask. They just want to be able to talk to somebody. And I think that is the first step in addressing, this mental health, is having the access to be able to do so. So I think that's what we're seeing across the board with all our young people and family. They just want to be able to know that the resources are there.
Yeah. Thank you, Cecilia. That's a really great point to touch on, just that there seems to be overall a higher need than what is currently being supported for students. And so I want to move on to the next question, and it's from our readers. We had some pre-submitted questions. This question is from Ava. And it asks, how can we support our parents during distance learning? And how can we get more funding for our schools in order to make sure our students get the help they will deserve once face-to-face instruction begins? And I'd love to turn the floor to you, Cecilia, if you could provide an answer for us.
Yeah. So I have 2 huge opportunities that anyone can be a part of, the community needs to be a part of. And one of them is an opportunity that only comes every 10 years, and that is the census. So by filling out your census, you are bringing in $20,000 over a 10-year period for your schools and communities. And the census is confidential. It doesn't ask you about citizenship status. And we have a deadline of September 30th to fill out your census. Now, the second big opportunity to bring some funding into our schools is voting yes on Proposition 15. It's also known as Schools and Communities First, and it's an initiative that's going to be on the ballot this 2020 that will bring $12 billion into our educational system, K through 12, by making corporations like the big guys, Chevron and Disneyland, pay their fair share of property tax. And it's not going to hurt small businesses who are valued at less than $3 million, and it's not going to hurt homeowners. So these are two big initiatives that we can participate in as a community, filling out the census and voting yes on Proposition 15.
That's great, thanks. And so this is a question for the four of you. All of your organizations have done a lot of work with community and offered a lot of services, but what can school districts and universities do to help lower stress and encourage education? And I would like to start with Jerry.
Mm-hmm. Yes, since morale is super low at the moment, schools can help by offering more counseling services, more tutors, and by providing emotional support to students. Schools have to recognize the fact that some students have to work harder than others due to the lack of these resources, especially young folks who are at the forefront of being essential workers and ultimately providing for their family. However, I'm certainly optimistic that youth leaders will take advantage of this pandemic and use it as some sort of cleanse to speak out of issues that affected the mental health of our students before. We can start by getting rid of predatory practices done by campus police, providing more counseling instead of co-ops, and getting rid of policies that predominantly harm our youth of color and objectify women in surrounding communities.
Thank you, Jerry. That's powerful. I would like to have the same question for Marisa. What are some things that what can school districts and universities do to help lower stress and encourage education?
Yeah, really want to echo and highlight and uplift what Jerry mentioned. It's such addressing these mental health needs and also providing and supporting access to basic needs is essential. So in Fresno Unified, for example, they are doing a great job in providing meals throughout the week at multiple sites, and also we're able to receive reimbursements for adult meals. So this needs to be replicated and expanded beyond Fresno Unified and across the county and across the state. And we need to support we need to have these large institutions also support initiatives to protect folks, to protect renters, and to protect homeowners, collaborate with the city and county. So that's like one key area. Another area is we also have to address this structural racism. In emergency education, we have to center equitable access and resources. And so this means centering the most vulnerable populations and those who have been impacted by these systems. And then the last thing I really just want to highlight, this is such a new environment. There's a lot, everyone is experiencing this pandemic in different ways, as has been mentioned. So we really need to show grace and kindness to our students, to our families, and even to our teachers. So this also means that we need to have less punitive discipline measures in place. What works on campus and in school may not work online. We need to support impacted families to be able to engage appropriately in this emergency education, and ensure that we are really listening to community and listening to the voices of our students and their families.
Thank you so much, Marisa. Uplifting these voices and being able to give the support. I wanted to ask the same question to Patrick. What are some things that the school districts and universities can do to help lower stress and encourage education in West Fresno?
Okay, well, for starters, provide computer literacy to the parents and grandparents and folks at home that's helping these kids or helping their child with online schooling. You know, a lot of these parents are having trouble with logging on and even keeping up with the lessons, or, you know, to try to even help their child move along with this online way of learning. Secondly, those kids that's on a 504 plan and those special education kids, you know, try to provide more tutors and fit their accommodations to their way of learning. You know, some of those kids, they can read, or but they can read, write, and so on. But what are they reading? You know, so some of them might read a passage and then don't retain it in a way to where they can't move on with the lesson, and then they need to you know, have accommodations. Like some of their lessons may be shorter or longer times in class, you know, so it needs to be someone helping them along the way, a tutor, maybe even a tutor of color, to help them that may understand or may even communicate a little bit better with them. to help them along the way, and especially those tutors and those trainings at home for just allowing the kids to recognize and the parents recognize what they're doing and how to work and to log on and how to use the tools of the computer. Um, that'll help with the stress as far as like um, a parent at home knowing what's going on and how to check the homework and how to check the emails. Because some parents at home they may they're not they haven't really used a computer at all, or some grandparents at home haven't really even they're not computer savvy, so it's giving them a hard time to even know what's going on. So the kids are manipulating the fact that they're even doing the work,
Yeah.
or so it's it's. I think that would be best right there.
Yeah. Thank you, Patrick. So I have my last question for Cecilia. What services can districts and universities do to help lower stress?
Yeah, I want to echo, I think a lot of what's already been touched on, but I think just one additional piece that I'll add is just addressing the barriers that exist for meaningful parent and youth engagement. So, as school closures happens, I think, there's districts have been having to make these decisions very quickly. And so I think that there has been also a lot of lack of opportunity to have parents be meaningful stakeholders in the decision-making process, and youth as well, right? So I think by creating these spaces to have actual participation from parents, because they want to have that clear line of communication, and let's hear from parents themselves and families themselves and youth themselves about what they would like to see and what needs they have, and address those challenges there with decision makers. So I think I will add that, creating an open line of communication with parents and youth to really be able to assess the need is going to be super important as we go back into the reopening of schools, because we know that even if, we have a distance learning model this upcoming fall, we are still going to continue to experience challenges as we go on into the new year. And so we really need to create those spaces for true engagement.
Thank you so much, Cecilia. And thank you everyone for this first segment. I'm going to close this segment and move on to the next one. For our next panel, we are going to talk about the digital divide in California, which we have already currently experienced live during this panel. The digital divide affects California students all over the state, and this is especially true in the San Joaquin Valley. Here we have digital deserts within poorer parts of Fresno and rural Fresno. We see the same thing in Los Angeles and all across California. So I want to welcome our new panelists. I want to welcome back Cecilia Castro. I also have Adriana Saldivar, who is the program manager for the Latino Community Foundation, and author and educator Miriam Gerba from Los Angeles. She teaches high school, writes and makes art, and her nonfiction book Mean was a finalist for the Lambda Literary Award in LGBTQ nonfiction. So I want to dive right in, and I'm going to start with Miriam. Welcome. So Los Angeles and the state of California are very economically diverse, and we have a lot of economic inequity. How does this digital divide exacerbate educational inequity, and how can the repercussions from what is happening now be felt later during a student's educational career?
So the digital divide is a result of racism and classism. That's undeniable. And my students understand that the internet is not a luxury. The internet is not a frivolity. My students understand that the internet is a need. When we've done an activity in class before where we place into a hierarchy what our wants and needs are, the internet ranks as one of their top needs. And now that we're experiencing education remotely, it is a top priority. And yet 40% of Latinos in California lack internet. 32% have no home computer. And when my district conducted a survey of students' families, they found that while Black, brown, and Asian families lacked access to internet and lacked access to home computers, white families responded that what they found was lacking among their students was motivation. So there is a problem. And it's the responsibility of the state to correct that. Internet should be available to everybody. It ought to be an easily accessible public good. And if we're providing education to students, but students don't have the means to access that education, all we're doing is entrenching and deepening the school to prison pipeline. That's essentially where our students are going to wind up.
Yeah, thank you, Miriam. And just to kind of piggyback off of that, I would love to hear your thoughts, Adriana, about this, how this digital divide is exacerbating these inequities and what type of repercussions may students feel as they move on in their educational careers.
Yes, thank you for that question. I think it's important for us to step back and realize that the students that are being left behind due to this digital divide are not experiencing educational inequity for the first time. What joins them all together is that they have, they are part of low-income families as a common factor. They are students of color, and they are constantly marginalized. The digital divide is just one more way in which their educational dreams and hopes are affected. We see them already struggling with larger class sizes, schools with less resources, and even to what the previous panel was speaking into, which was the number of additional staff the school may have, affects students of color, affects students who are low income. In the state of California, 54% of all students are Latino if they're in K-12. And so as a representative of the Latino Community Foundation, I really want to bring attention to what that means locally here in the San Joaquin Valley. When we talk about why are students being left behind, one is because their families can't afford to have the technology at home. And that, some school districts looked into repairing that by issuing hardware like computers, tablets, and hotspots. And that's only a Band-Aid solution, really, because we recognize that those students need so much more than just hardware. Many who live in rural Fresno and rural counties, areas of the counties across the valley, don't even have an option to access broadband. There's deserts for broadband because it's not profitable to have that service there. So we need to start looking at access to the internet as a basic utility across the state, not as a luxury, because that will ensure that our students can continue their education. Across the state, the graduation rates for Latinos are super low when it comes to obtaining a bachelor's degree. I think it's 12.5% compared to a higher rate for the mainstream population. But when we look at places like the west side of Fresno County, the percentage is less than 4% of degrees attained by Latino students. So this is something that not only affects them right now, it has affected them for years. Their families are impacted by it. And as a community, we are all impacted when our students are not able to access and continue their education.
Yeah. Thank you, Adriana. And moving keeping within the same theme, I have the same question for Cecilia. How is this digital divide making long-lasting inequities that can be felt within a student's educational career?
Yeah, I think this just, to speak on Adriana's point, I think one important factor to look at is just the literacy rates that we have across the Central Valley, because when you look at them, you will be shocked. We have some of the highest illiteracy rates, but sometimes as little as 22% of our students in a school district knowing how to read at grade level. And these disparities are even wider when it comes to our English language learners, our Black students, our students with disabilities. And we know and understand that literacy is the building block of education. So that really impacts college readiness. It impacts readiness for different careers, opportunities for civic engagement and participation. So we can expect the digital divide, as Adriana was just mentioning, right, to widen this achievement or really the opportunity gap, right? Because the matter of fact is that our students were already really behind, and we can expect this digital divide to widen the gap and have long-lasting repercussions on student achievement, really, and academic success. So that's definitely something to look at, because when you look at that, I mean, like Adriana was mentioning, just the lack of access to the technology, it really just is impacting our students' achievement, and therefore, the course of their entire academic journey.
Yeah. Thank you, Cecilia. And I actually want to stay with you for the next question. So what are some of the ways that the state of California and local school districts can work together to close this digital divide?
Yeah, I think it's been touched on a little bit, and I think we can all agree that broadband should be a free public utility, because the issue of broadband isn't just needed in our schools, it's needed all throughout our communities. And I think, right now it's really challenging for school districts to have to jump through hoops, really, to find solutions to a much, much larger problem. I mean, first, when school closures happened, we started with, these buses that had Wi-Fi and students had to go to those buses. That didn't work. Now we have hotspots. Many of our families don't understand what a hotspot is, don't understand the terminology, and it's not, a permanent solution. And so I think there's also school districts that are exploring how to become their own internet service provider, but are seeing that there are a lot of challenges when doing so, because this would then allow school districts to be able to provide free internet for students in that area. So again, we have a lot of different types of small Band-Aid solutions that are not addressing the much larger problem of not being able to have broadband, especially in our rural communities, right? And then to be able to provide also that training and digital literacy for our families, right? Because now broadband and connectivity, it's not just an educational right. Now at this point, it's a human right? So addressing it at the state level to be able to provide this free service will be, the step to do so. And that's how school districts and the state can work together, by addressing it at the state level for the entire community and not just for school districts.
Thank you, Cecilia. And I want to turn it to Adriana. So what are some of the ways, what are some ways that the state of California and local school districts can work together to close the digital divide?
There are some bright spots in what has happened given the pandemic, right? We see many more school districts kind of stepping up and creating this sort of emergency response for their students and their families by issuing hardware. That is great. That is not sufficient. We also see that some of the tech companies and telecom companies are figuring out how to expand their services. That's great, but that is not sufficient. I think the real way to solve this gap is for a cross-sector coalition to really come together and address the root causes of that inequity. We need to engage our state leaders. We need leadership from our governor. We need funding from the federal government, so that those more forgotten communities are also receiving the funding that they need to address this. We need leadership from businesses, from the philanthropic sector, from our educational leaders, and from our local elected officials. And once we do that, we can really start to tackle the depth of this inequity and the widening of this gap. Because as we continue to do distance learning, as this pandemic continues to change the way we work and interact with each other, the access and the need to access the internet will become a daily struggle for many people, not just students, but their parents. And I agree with something that was mentioned earlier about we need to also support the parents of those students. And I think that's a place where the district could really come in. Many of our parents, especially if they're monolingual or have just limited experience with technology, need to be taught, essentials on how to support their students, do their homework online, how to log in, how to interact with the teachers. And so there's a lot that we can all do. But I think really to solve it, we need way more than just the state and the school district. We need everybody engaged.
Thank you, Adriana. And I want to kick it over to Miriam. It's continuing on with this discussion. What are some ways that the state of California and local school districts can work together to close the digital divide. I know LA is the largest school district and Fresno is the third largest, so I think there's a lot of similarities there as well.
There are, and I wanted to co-sign what was said by panelists who came before me in terms of treating the internet as a public utility instead of framing it as some sort of luxury item. We're absolutely dependent on it in order to deliver education to students. And I also very much appreciate the mention that parents and families need to be educated as far as digital literacy and how to enhance digital literacy and deepen it in their own homes, but that can't happen without some sort of outreach and without local organizing. So if parents and local organizations that engage in mutual aid and other forms of organizing could do that in order to bring parents into the mix, I think that would be ideal.
Thank you, Miriam. And thank you everyone who participated in this panel. So we're gonna move on to the next segment. But before I go there, I wanna take a moment to introduce Tim Ritchie, publisher for the Fresno Bee, to talk a little bit about the Ed Lab, the work we're doing, and how you can support us. Take it away, Tim.
Great, thank you, Isabel. Thank you, panelists, and thank you, guests, for joining us today for this important discussion. As Isabel mentioned at the start of our program, today's event is an initiative of the Education Lab at the Fresno Bee. The Education Lab is a team of community-funded journalists working to improve educational outcomes in the San Joaquin Valley. We believe that educational attainment and ultimately increasing the number of college graduates is key to economic mobility and a stronger community. Since launching this effort in December of 2019, this team has hosted numerous forums and community engagement events to elevate diverse voices in the community and broaden our understanding of the region's challenges and opportunities. This team has surfaced many important stories that have led to change. To keep this important work going, we need your help. Our goal is to raise an additional $30,000 by the end of the year. I'm asking you today to please support these journalists with a donation to the Impact Media and Measurement Fund, hosted at the Central Valley Community Foundation. Pinned in the Facebook comments and shared in the text below this video is the link to make a donation to support this fund. Thank you again for joining us today, and thank you for your support. Back to you, Isabel.
Thank you, Tim. For this next segment, I want to dive into childcare for parents during distance learning. This may be one of the most challenging aspects of distance learning. Schools are closed for the safety of the community, but many parents, especially parents who are essential workers, must go to the workplace every day. I want to introduce a new panelist, Angelica Garcia. Angelica has done a lot of work with youth parents. She is a family coach at Fresno Barrios Unidos. She herself was a young mother, and she now works to help young parents navigate the challenges and stigma associated with young parenthood. And our other two panelists, which you have already met, Miriam Gerba and Patrick Hamilton. I want to start with you, Angelica. You work with a lot of young parents, many of whom are essential workers, and many are students themselves, be that high school or college students in your line of work. How do you think this crisis and the lack of childcare can or has exacerbated inequity for young parents?
Thank you, Isabel. Yes, I am a family coach at Fresno Barrios Unidos. I work with young parents ages 12 to 24, many who are students, essential workers, and or the main caregivers. I'd like to say that the lack of effort put into childcare has been an issue prior to COVID-19. I say this because the expense to afford quality care is beyond what our young parents can pay for. And instead, young parents are left with only what they can afford, leaving their children to be stripped away from learning opportunities. In addition, our young parents suffer with the worry of who they can trust leaving their children with, especially now. They all hold themselves to the highest of standards because of all the stigma that has been aimed towards them. The pressure is real, let alone our young parents that are learning from home are challenged daily because this pandemic has left families without jobs and increased household size. The inequity has always been there, and now they have been heightened because of the additional stress of balancing school, work, and parenting in a pandemic.
Thank you, Angelica. That's, I mean, it's interesting because like we think of parents, but a lot of times we don't think of young parents who are also students. So I want to talk about all parents in this segment. So switching over to Patrick, how has this crisis and lack of childcare exacerbated inequity for parents in West Fresno?
Well, it's the sense of you know, like that pill I was speaking on earlier. It's like some parents have to quit their jobs. If they're two-parent household, one might have to quit their job. The other working extra hard. You know, it's just like an added stress to the problem. Especially when you can't like leave your kids at home or trust your kids at home, or if your home is in an environment to where it's unsafe, period. You know, so um, by forcing your kids to stay at home and not have like any social outings or anything in that nature, it's hard for the parents because they can't provide. They can't go to work. They can't leave their home. They can't. And it brings stress in the household, and tension and depression. It's almost as if they're like incarcerated. So, and all that being saying, it's a depression that's sitting in the house, which causes families to break up.
Thank you, Patrick. Miriam, I want to hear your perspective as well on this same question. How do you think the lack of childcare has exacerbated inequity for parents in Los Angeles, be they students or not students, just adults?
It's been primarily hard for women. Childcare overwhelmingly falls on the shoulders of women. Domestic work isn't equally divided in many households. Women are expected to do most of that work. And so this is impacting women. And in my district, there was a moment when the district had announced that schools were going to be reopened and teachers had to teach from their classrooms. We were going to teach remotely from our classrooms. However, we were prohibited from bringing our own children to campus. And we were told that we could pay $1,500 a month to have our children cared for by district aides in group settings. And those group settings then would enable the spread of COVID. And so there was a negotiation between our union and the district decided to do away with that, with the hypocrisy of expecting teachers to teach while not allowing us to bring our own children and to care for our own children in our classrooms. Just revealed the level of catastrophe that we are facing. And I don't think there is any simple solution or easy solution when it comes to childcare, because we can't circumvent this virus. This virus is going to find its way to us. And again, who is it that's tasked with childcare, especially group childcare in the United States? It's overwhelmingly Black and Latino women. And when middle-class folks push for reopening, in particular the reopening of childcare, they're also pushing to expose Black women and Latinas to coronavirus. And there's no easy way around that. I wish that the state would wise up and realize that people need to stay home, families need to stay home, families need to stay safe, and we need stipends, vouchers, and other forms of support in order to get us through this time, because really that's the only feasible and realistic solution.
Thank you, Miriam. So I want to move on to the next question. Given everything that you all have seen and the work that you have done, do parents have the resources they need to work and take care of their children? If not, what resources do they need? So I'll start with you, Miriam. I know you were just talking about stipends, but maybe you can go on a little more about what resources parents need.
I don't think that parents have the resources they need. And again, that lack of resource is class-based, and it's also highly racialized. And it's incredibly frustrating that districts are being asked to step in and pick up slack when both the state and the federal government should push in order to provide for our needs. If you look at Congress's inaction is laughable and kind of disgusting. There should be a greater safety net for parents and for working families. And if you compare leadership in countries where families are able to stay home and care for themselves, they've quickly recovered, well, not necessarily recovered from the pandemic, but are in a much better scenario than we are here in the United States.
Thank you, Miriam. So I want to ask the same question to Patrick. Do parents have the resources they need to work and take care of their children? If not, what resources do they need?
Well, I don't believe so. I think that for those households and those parents that do qualify for receiving the resources, I think for those who have to sacrifice losing a job, maybe that parent at home should have the resources to be able to be getting paid to be at home to help with their children and you know, cope with what's going on through this pandemic. I also believe that they should be given some type of training and some type of counseling to help them along the way. Also, you know, it's a lot of stressful things that's going on in some of these houses and a lot of tension that's building up. They need someone to talk to. So I do believe that they need to be funded for some of their actions that they're losing.
Thank you, Patrick. So, I mean, we're discussing today there's a lot of need for internet, for accessibility to be able to have contact, counseling, mental health. These are all very intertwined and they're all heavy topics. I think we lost Angelica, unfortunately. So she was having some connectivity issues, which I think it's, although this is frustrating on a performance level, it's very true to what is happening right now and what we are all experiencing. I know that some of you guys are parents. I think Angelica is back. Hello. Thank you, Angelica. I'm so sorry for the connectivity issues. You have my sympathy, but we were just talking about how all of this has been, all of the issues that we talked about today, like there really is a need for help. And one of the questions that I was asking the other panelists was, do you think that parents have the resources that they need in order to be able to work from home while having childcare? I think that there's been a connectivity issue. So we're gonna move on. And we're going to move on to the next question, which is actually a question that we had submitted from the public by Ava. How, given that everything we talked about has been very heavy, but we still want to have a solutions journalism. We want to focus on solutions. So how can we support our parents during distance learning? And what are some ideas or resources that can be offered to working parents, be they students who are working parents or parents who have students? And we'll start with Miriam.
I think that parents can be supported through direct communication with teachers. I hope that that's happening. Our district hasn't begun yet, so I'm not sure how that's necessarily going to be executed. But I think maintaining open contact with teachers, getting to know teachers is important. And then I also think that it's important for there to be, it's important for teachers to also have the ability to cross language barriers. There are so many parents who are speakers of languages other than English, but we've got a lot of teachers who are monolingual English speakers. And so how is it then that those parents are going to be regularly communicating with those parents? So I think opening those lines and engaging in very direct communication is important. And I also think that it's going to be incredibly important for teachers to remember this. We're in a state of crisis right now, and it's crisis on multiple fronts. We're dealing with political crisis, we're dealing with a public health crisis, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so being gentle with one another and first and foremost remaining flexible is incredibly important. For example, I've heard of like some really draconian measures that some teachers have put into effect. For example, a student can't make it to Zoom class for a day. And so what does that teacher do? They punish the student for having been unable to attend that Zoom session for whatever reason. Likely it wasn't the student's own fault. And then they give that student more Zoom sessions and basically what amounts to Zoom detention. Why are you going to torture a kid by forcing them to sit in Zoom jail? So I think that maintaining a high level of compassion as well as a high level of flexibility is critical right now, especially in order to maintain one another's mental health.
Thank you, Miriam. And I have the same audience-based question for Patrick. How can we support our parents during distance learning, and what are some ideas or resources that can be offered to working parents, be they students or otherwise?
Again, we can provide training for those parents who's not so computer savvy, those grandparents, those maybe students at home that need also training with help from their little siblings and maybe themselves on how to log on and use the internet and how to use the computer tools to their needs. And also for parents, maybe they may come up with some type of Zoom or virtual counseling group amongst parents as a group, and maybe they may have the similar problems in their household, so where they can discuss it and work it out amongst themselves, and solve the problem, solve the issue, or whatever they may be having. And again, work together as one amongst other parents and with the teachers. Maybe like have a meeting at the end of the course and provide training and extra help and extra tutors for the kids along the way.
Thank you so much. And for the two of you, a really quick question. Do you guys know of any good resources, organizations that within that serve your district that you guys would recommend for parents or who are seeking childcare?
Who are seeking childcare? Well, no, not at this moment, but you can come down to West Fresno Family Resource Center, and we'll be pleased to help you out with whatever you need. That's at 1802 East California, Fresno, California, 93706.
Yeah, I can't promote the use of any sort of childcare under pandemic circumstances because that's going to expose racially minoritized women to coronavirus. And so I think that it's important to urge everybody to keep their kids at home if that's what has to happen.
Yeah, thank you so much, Miriam. Well, thank you guys for joining me today. I really appreciate you guys and every one of our panelists today. And thank you so much for watching. And so sorry for some of the digital divide issues that we personally had. This is how much of a serious issue this is throughout the state of California. Broadband is something that is not available to everyone. And as we talked about today, there are some recommendations and solutions. So this has been a very insightful conversation. The Ed Lab will be releasing a story soon with some of the resources that some of our other panelists had mentioned in regards to mental health care and possibly ways to be able to like find internet, please consider signing up for our newsletter. It is free and written by me, and I promise not to flood your inbox. You can also follow me on Twitter, Isabel S. DIEPPA, and the Fresno Bee at Fresno Bee. I want to once again give a giant thank you to all of our panelists. Please check out their work. Cecilia Castro from the Dolores Huerta Foundation, Marisa Moraza and Angelica Garcia from Fresno Barrios Unidos, Patrick Hamilton from the Sweet Potato Project, and Adriana Saldivar from the Latino Community Foundation, and finally, Miriam Gerba, an author and educator from Los Angeles, and Jerry Rivera from 99 Roots. Thanks again, everybody. We're out.